If you think emotional intimacy is just about being soft and mushy or close and mushy, you're going to want to listen to this episode. We're going to talk all about emotional intimacy, why it's so important, how to cultivate it, and how it improves your sexual connection in your relationship. Stay tuned. Welcome to the Secret Formula of Femininity for women who want to live a more feminine, fun, and fabulous life. I'm Dr. Nicole Montero, your host on this weekly journey to unlocking your inner radiance, nurturing fulfilling relationships, and becoming the best version of yourself. Welcome back to the Secret Formula of Femininity. I'm your host, Dr. Nicole, and your guide on this journey to tapping into your feminine essence. So, we talk all about relationships and what are the things that you and your feminine essence can gain from a healthy relationship, and how can you contribute to a healthy relationship. And emotional intimacy is a cornerstone, it's a foundation of happiness and healthiness, but it's almost like a lost art. We live in such a fast paced world. We live in a social media world. And I'm going to talk about some of the ways that social media impacts our ability to really connect and be intimate. But we've sort of lost the art of a lot of ways that really help people to connect. Do you remember writing letters? Right? Do you remember kind of being able to daydream and talk on the phone with someone and just like slowly develop that connection? Well, a lot of that is not existing, or it's changed and morphed so much because of, so the role of social media and the role of so many things in our lives right now. So let's get back to basics. How can you develop emotional intimacy? Why is it so important? And how can you use it to make your relationship better? So I want to share a little story with you. This is actually a friend of mine. I'm going to call her Denise. She knows that I'm going to talk about this, but Denise isn't her real name. But she's been with her man. They've been married for a long time, right? So sometimes we talk about relationships, ups and downs, and things like that. And she was recently telling me how she's been struggling to connect with her husband. It's like things that they used to just vibe with, they're arguing over now. They're kind of going to their own little corners of the house. They're not going out as much. They just feel out. They have been feeling out of sync with each other. And that same old spark, which they were one of those couples that's been maintaining that spark for years and close to decades. So they weren't kind of strangers to what you need to make a relationship work. But they started realizing that some of the things they used to do, they weren't doing anymore, or some of the ways that they used to feel connected, they weren't feeling that way anymore. So I kind of, weaved in some tips just of all of the women that I've worked with, all of the couples, all of the things that I've seen, and what can tend to happen. And what Denise discovered is that, first of all, a few things. One, she could take the reins. She didn't have to wait for them to go to counseling and all this stuff, that she could make some changes herself that would spark, that they would be like the spark to change in her relationship. But she also realized that she needed to be intentional in a different way around emotional intimacy, because when we got to the bottom of it, that was where the disconnect was coming from. And she realized she needed to take intentional time to communicate, but not in the way that a lot of times we do as women, which is just sharing information. She needed to communicate deeply and emotionally, be vulnerable, and allow a space where her husband knew he could be vulnerable with her, and to not be afraid of conflict. That was a big issue that over time they both had developed this perspective without even knowing it, of like, well, let's just let sleeping dogs lie. Like, let's not cause conflict. Let's not rock the boat. Not knowing that in some ways they were cutting off the path to emotional intimacy. So soon enough, like some of these changes happen after just one or two conversations, one or two times of being intentional about listening and taking the risk to say how she felt, that they started to notice a change. And here's the thing, the little secret she told me, They were having more sex, better sex than they had in a while. They were wanting to hang out and be with each other. And, they just felt more connected. It's a feeling that you can't always put into words, but a woman knows when she feels emotionally connected in her relationship, and she knows when her man is feeling that as well. So she just had to kind of step back and be intentional. Realize, first of all, diagnose the problem. And a lot of times the problem is due to a lack of emotional intimacy or connection. And then be willing to do something about it, to take small steps. So, what exactly is emotional intimacy? I said it's not just about being soft and mushy. And we hear intimacy all the time. We hear these words all the time. But do we really understand what they mean? Especially in a world where we get so called people's transparency all the time. People are always coming online or even just out in society, just seemingly being transparent. But that doesn't mean that they're intimate with you or you're intimate with them or you have a connection. So, what exactly is emotional intimacy? It is the ability to share your true self with the person you're in relationship with. And that includes your fears, your dreams, your quirks. I always tell you guys, I'm a weird girl at heart. Remember when Issa Rae had, she started with Awkward Black Girl? I never really watched the series, but I could totally relate just to the idea of that character. Like being someone that's just you sometimes march to the beat of your own drum. You can fit in, you know how to do all of that, but you have your quirks, right? But you're able to share that with someone when you're intimate with them. It's a safe space to be vulnerable. Vulnerable means you have to know that it's a risk, right? And you're opening yourself up to somebody else. And doing that without fear of judgment or ridicule helps to develop emotional intimacy. It's a two-way street, right? And so when both people are feeling seen and heard and respected, that's like what you pour into the relationship: non-judgment, ridiculing, acceptance, allowing the other to be seen, heard, and respected. And when you pour that into the relationship, the thing that grows and blossoms is a deep connection. Love, that is the foundation of love, right? So there's lust, and they've done so many studies that looked at the brain at different phases of a relationship and the development of a relationship. And so in the early phases, you are literally like the reward centers and all of the excitement centers of your brain are lighting up. And if you're somebody that loves newness, new relationships, you love the feeling of falling in love, you're just feeling on cloud nine. You're just feeling excited all the time. But as relationships evolve, that kind of settles down a bit. And then the other areas of your brain and your being that point to connection and love and trust and feeling accepted, those are triggered. So you kind of have to go through the parts of like that chemical connection with someone, and then you fall into the safe part of the relationship. Now, most of us want both, right? We want to be able to summon up that connection, that excitement. Who doesn't want to have passion in their relationship? That is important for most people, right? Maybe when they get older, but look, senior citizens are some of the most sexually active people out here. So we're not going to say that with age you don't want sexual connection. But we all want to have that balance where we can get excitement, but at the same time feel safe and connected with someone. And so you just have to be intentional about it. So if you're someone that just thrives on newness all the time, you probably haven't or don't typically get to an emotionally intimate place in your relationship because you're on to the next thing. You like, finding people online or meeting people out in public, go out a few times, doing this, doing that, but you never get to the part where the like real chemical excitement dies down and you have to truly get to know this person. And that part is a little bit more scary. It's a little riskier. But what do we say? With risk comes payoff. And so imagine when you're in a relationship where you can feel like someone sees you, they respect you, they accept you, they hear you. That is intoxicating. That's a whole other level of intoxication. And I listen to a lot of interviews. I have worked with a lot of male clients, couples. I listen to a lot of just interviews and read a lot. And there's one theme that I hear from men, healthy men, or men who value themselves and have stable self-esteem, men that want to connect, is that they're often feeling misunderstood because it's assumed that they only want sexual connection. Now, of course, what men and women require for sex is often different, not all the time. But just because a man may be able to be sexually intimate with a woman without emotional intimacy, that doesn't mean he doesn't desire it. So there's often a misunderstanding that women want emotional intimacy and men want sexual intimacy. We both want both of them. But the art of cultivating emotional intimacy can be challenging, right? One thing is that when we don't, in a long term relationship, it is hard to sustain without some level of emotional intimacy. And so that's the foundation of building trust, of being able to with each other, being able to communicate. Think about all of the things you hear people saying they want in a relationship. I want a partner who's emotionally intelligent. I want someone who can communicate. I want someone who can consider my needs. Well, in order to do those things or to want to do those things in a relationship, you have to have that ability to have emotional intimacy where you're allowing yourself to be vulnerable and you're accepting the other person's vulnerability. And so why is it so challenging, right? There's like a whole, generations of people who feel like relationships are transactional. How much money does he make? How good does she look? How much can he provide? How how much sexual, pull or energy does she command, right? It's very transactional. I'll give you this from my essence to get that from your essence, right? But we're not truly honoring the masculine and the feminine in this transactional way. And one reason that emotional intimacy is so challenging is number one, we have created this very transactional view of relationships and it just keeps getting perpetuated. Also, there's this idea among men, but now increasingly women, that being emotionally intimate makes you weak or too exposed. And we're glossing over the part of how much courage it takes to be vulnerable like that. It literally takes courage, and how much you have worked on yourself to take the risk to do that in order to get the payoff in a relationship, right? There's a lot of lead up to emotional intimacy, including the fact that you want to understand your patterns of how you get into relationships, how you choose people, right? Do you ignore green flags and chase after red flags? So, if you have that pattern of doing that, then yes, being emotionally intimate with someone who is toxic, that is a dangerous game. So, it kind of goes back to before the relationship. But let's just take that this you're in a relationship is not toxic. Most relationships actually are not toxic. That's the thing, right? There's a subset of them and people, toxic people, but most relationships are not. There's little things in terms of lack of communication, lack of understanding things like the art of connection, the art of sensuality, all of those things that make, put these bumps along the roads. Then there's life that happens. So for the most part, if you can understand what tweaks and what changes you need to make in your relationship, you can develop that emotional intimacy, right? So that other barrier is that there's this myth that being intimate, emotionally intimate, is too weak, too exposing. And that comes from this transactional view of relationships that we have. And I was actually talking to someone, we were talking about this whole idea, and you've heard me talk about it on the podcast, of being like a highly sensitive person. And what happens is you have these skills of being very perceptive, intuitive, and things like that. And it becomes a superpower almost, especially in this day and age. When you know how to connect truly with someone and be present, it's almost like a rare skill. It's a superpower because in a world of transactions, real intimacy, realness, and authenticity, but not just transparency. Some people are transparent and they're not intimate. Okay. If you could get in front of hundreds of people, thousands of people on it used to be just on TV, right? They used to have those shock shows where people would come and tell all their business. They would be transparent, but there was not intimacy that was developing. So someone could be online and be transparent. That doesn't mean that they're developing intimacy and really allowing themselves to take that risk with any one individual person. So, social media is another one of those barriers. Part of it is because we are so used to curating our image. You've heard the saying, like, don't compare your real life to someone's highlight reels on social media. People show, we all do it, right? I'm not going to go and show you my bathroom after the kids just made a mess in it and all that stuff. Like that's just not what I'm going to do. Some people do, right? But we tend to show our highlights for the most part. And it's easy to lose touch with what it means to share ourselves genuinely. And for some people, they also show themselves, on social media, even if it's not the highlights. But then it can be hard for some of those same people to share it more individually or intimately when they're connecting with an individual person. So fear is also another factor, right? We all fear being rejected. It is like we can get triggered. It can be a trauma trigger when we feel like we're going to be rejected. We fear being hurt. We fear that we're going to be put in a position of our past trauma. I heard this amazing interview on the Hardly Initiated podcast with the creator that I actually follow, Wall Street Trapper. So he was just talking about how he's been so successful in life, but why he hasn't been in a healthy relationship. And this interview was so powerful. He talked about how he met a woman of his dreams. He had never connected in that way with a woman. But his understanding of intimacy and connection was that he would just kind of trauma dump, tell her all about her past trauma, and then he would do things for her. But then when it came to other aspects of displaying love and really being present with her emotions and sharing his current emotions, not just all the trauma that happened in the past, that was difficult. All right, let me repeat that, right? Sometimes we can trauma dump and we can talk about the past and we can share our battle scars and battle stories with somebody, and we think that that is truly being intimate. Now, it may be part of it, right? You could tell somebody things about your past that you never told them, but intimacy is also about the present. We don't want to get so caught up in just sharing the past. And this happens even as a therapist in therapy groups or with group coaching, where we get so focused on reliving the past and we're really scared to face what's going on in the present, how we're feeling in the present, how we're disappointed, right? It's hard to share those things with a partner. And so in this interview, Wall Street Trapper was saying that he ended up taking a break and breaking it off, so to speak, with her. I don't know if they got back together, but he felt like he wanted to work on himself. And I think that's an interesting concept because I actually think you don't always have to break it off to quote work on yourself, right? Once you've gotten into that commitment with somebody, how about a lot of healing and healthy relationship building happens in the relationship? It's not often that everybody is completely healed when they get into a relationship. So a lot of the healing happens within the context of the relationship. Like especially if you're willing to work on it and to work on yourself. So you don't always have to just break up with somebody, right? I think that's another form of avoidance, like the intimacy in the present. So, yeah, we have social media, we fear rejection, we get caught up in our past traumas, and what happens is when we hold back, so let me give you some examples. There are often ways that we mask our feelings in how we're communicating. And we will swear we are communicating like, oh, we'll just be talking on and on for a half hour, 60 minutes, on and on. But we haven't truly, we've been masking, we've been sharing information. Women will often use words that are missing the emotional component. So they'll give a rundown of what happened during the day, but they won't share the part where they felt scared or where they felt happy or they were anticipating disappointment. They'll leave those out, or they won't tell their partner how they've been feeling neglected lately and they're trying to balance like how to support him, but also how to say, hey, this is what I need for you, right? It's very scary. It can be to let another person know how they're not meeting your needs and to do it in a way that makes you, that where you feel vulnerable. A lot of us are able to yell and scream sometimes and be accusatory, but to really open up and say, hey, like, I miss being around you. I miss the way we used to talk. I miss feeling supported by you. I feel like you're distant from me. I feel like it's hard for me to get close to you, right? Those are the things that build intimacy. Those are some of the phrases. All right. So part of it is we want to allow ourselves to be seen and understood as we are right now. That's why I'm always, we talk about trauma bonding. A lot of times people will bond over their past experiences and it'll give the illusion of closeness, but then they're not able, if they only focus on that, they're not able to support each other with their current experiences and feelings. Our feelings are changing all the time. So we getting caught up in the past, and sometimes we stay in the past because the pain is familiar. The triumph and getting in touch with our purpose and who we are, that is less familiar. So we stay with what's familiar, which can be the pain. And don't let another person have a traumatic, painful past or be so caught up in hearing our trauma because they have some sort of savior complex or codependency. Then in that case, they can even be encouraging us to stick with talking about the past. My message, if you can't tell, is like the past is fine. It definitely has an influence on who we are, but the present is where the real connection happens. Okay? So here's the part that often surprises people. Of course, intimacy, emotional intimacy and physical intimacy are deeply connected. But it's almost like it's a dance. You'll often hear me talk about the dance of communication. So, of course, trust is needed for true long-standing like sexual connection because that requires communication. It's not transactional. Sex is a vulnerable act, right? Especially for women, but men as well. There's you're trying to just understand each other. There can be performance anxiety, a lot of it could be body image issues. Oh, here's the thing, right? Women, we think we have body image issues. Men do as well, right? They have body image issues, body dysmorphia, all of those things, right? So you're opening yourself up when you are in a sexual connection in your relationship that is not transactional. If it's transactional, it's like, okay, you're paying for it or you're somehow, it's tit for tat. But when you're truly being intimate, you require that trust in that safe place. You can communicate and you can be open to sharing with each other what you enjoy and what you want. Here's the thing. There's been tons of research where couples who score higher on emotional intimacy have a more satisfying sex life. And that's because the trust is there, right? And I have some guests coming that are going to talk just all about the phases of connection throughout a relationship. There's life, there's stress, there's changes in libido, there's medical issues. There's so many things that can affect the sex life of a couple. But one thing that is steady is the role that emotional intimacy and feeling like you have a safe place with your partner, that is really important to being able to overcome some of these issues. And then you could talk about things like, how you bring excitement and anticipation and novelty, as well as just comfort, right? Non-sexual intimate like physical touch is so powerful in a relationship, and making sure you have enough of that throughout the day is key. So the emotional intimacy is really important because not only does it help you feel closer to be open and vulnerable in your sexual relationship in your with your partner, but it also is the key to being able to talk about and solve any problems that come up in that area. Let's face it, like life is going to life. There are medications, there are illnesses, there are life circumstances, there's stress, there's anxiety. All of these things can affect, especially men and women. But men don't talk about it a lot, how these things affect them. Women, we are affected so much by stress. But if we develop and cultivate the emotional intimacy, then we can at least have the emotional intimacy to be able to explore how to resolve those issues. So, what are some tips for being able to develop this emotional intimacy with your partner? One is, let's go back to the art of active listening. Put your phones down, turn the TV off, like just sit and talk. Go out to a different setting, to a coffee shop, go somewhere and go sit in the car, go sit by the water. Like I live, we have rivers all over here. Just go sit by the river, sit and just actively listen. Ask how their day was. Ask what are their plans for the next 5 months or 6 months or the next year. Like, well, what do you want from me, or how can I help you, or what's hard for you in life right now, right? What's going great for you? Just do active listening. There are so many awesome couples relationships cards games where you could just pick out those questions if you don't want to rack your brain on like what to say, where you ask each other these questions like, hey, we haven't, I thought I knew you, but we all changed. Let's use this card game to get to know each other better and to actively listen. You have to schedule emotional check ins. You might even sometimes have to schedule sex depending on your schedule, but regularly set aside time. Maybe it's the end of the week. Maybe you could call it a family meeting, but if you have kids, do a family meeting also without the kids. Check in with each other. Find out, like, hey, I've noticed you seem to be going through this, or this is how things look from me looking on the outside looking in. Tell me, I want to know, I want to check in with you. Show that interest. But the thing is, you have to be intentional about this. You can't just let it fall by the wayside. And if you're more of a passive person, like you're not used to confrontation a lot, that might be like a little bit of a push for you. Also, if you're a person where you're always used to speaking up and confronting, you might have to practice more of the active listening part, right? Not so much of just talking part. If you are noticing some issues with connection, take that risk and be vulnerable first. You could even say, like, I want to share something with you that is really hard for me, and I'm scared. I don't know how you're going to take it, but X, Y, and Z, right? Take that first step to be vulnerable. If you're nervous, just start small. Say something small like, I debated whether I wanted to tell you this because I didn't know how you would take it, but I have been feeling X, Y, and Z, right? You get my point? You can just preface it with like, I'm really scared to say this, and somehow that takes the anxiety down. Also, the key thing about emotional intimacy is really like self reflection intimacy, I'll call it. It starts with self awareness and self-reflection. If you know what your triggers are, if you know what you're going through at this stage in your life, if you know what's challenging for you, then you're better able to communicate that and bring it up with someone else. You have to also know men and women tend to communicate differently. And women, we might be more open in some cases to jumping to emotional intimacy. So that doesn't mean that men don't want it, but they aren't, that's not how they're socialized all the time. So they may want it, but they may not understand exactly how it works. So the more you self-reflect and you become aware, then you model that just in how you show up. All right. The other thing that we don't talk enough about in relationships, especially long term relationships, there has to be a lot of forgiveness and understanding. That is not the same as struggle love, right? I always hear people paint this picture like I'm sick of struggle love. And I get it. I agree too. Like you shouldn't be going to jail for people and, going through abuse and this person's in the hospital and y'all got each person has a bunch of kids outside of each other and, cheating back and forth and all of this stuff, right? But there are going to be challenges in a relationship. And one thing for you to think about and then talk about is what are the non negotiables for you? But then knowing that if you've been with someone 5, 10, 15, 20 plus years, there are going to be challenges. You have to learn to practice forgiveness and use those challenges to better communicate, right? If you feel like you all have hit below the belt, like said some things, I call hitting below the belt when you bring up things that a person has told you in their moments of vulnerability and openness, and you bring those things up in an argument and throw it back in their face. You know that, a sore spot for them was that their mother wasn't around or their father wasn't around. And then when you're mad and in an argument, you bring that up. Oh, you have mommy issues, you have daddy issues, right? You're throwing it back in their face. Or the person says something that truly hurt you, something about your physical self or other aspects of yourself. You have to be willing to, you all have to communicate those things, but you have to understand when forgiveness is important. Forgiveness doesn't mean forget, but it means that the more you hold on to grudges and every little thing that the person did, the harder it is for you to be in the present and move forward together. Now, cheating and infidelity is a whole other issue too. There's a book I'm going to get into called The State of Affairs by Esther Perel. And I'm going to do a whole episode on that because there's so much to infidelity and cheating and what it means and whether couples can recover from it and, the whole shebang. But just know that whatever the challenge, right, there are many betrayals that can happen in a relationship. There could be secrets, there could be hiding things, there could be lack of transparency when it's needed. And once those things come to light, you have to understand that in order to move forward, communication is key, but forgiveness in a lot of instances is key. And if you can't forgive, that's okay. If there are things that have happened that you can't forgive, that's your prerogative. But you're going to know that like it's hard to be long-term in a relationship if you don't practice forgiveness in some way or another. And if you can't, you might just have to leave, right? I'm just telling you that resentment hardens your heart, and if you get to a place where there are multiple things that have happened and that you cannot forgive them and move on, then you really need to look at like, what do you want from this relationship? All right. So I did get a question, and I actually get this question a lot, but somebody actually sent me a DM. So this person said, what if I am scared to be vulnerable because of past hurt? And I kind of touched on that a little bit. That is very common. Like we are self protective creatures. We want to protect ourselves physically, but also emotionally. And we don't want to repeat things from the past that are going to put us in the same position of being hurt. But you have to understand, if you recognize past hurts, then hopefully you have done some reflecting and some self-awareness. Hopefully you've been doing some healing. You've gotten some you've done some self-healing, you've gotten some therapy, some coaching, so that you better understand your part in those past hurts. I'm not saying it was your fault, but what were things that you overlooked, or what are things that you just need to know next time are not healthy? So once you've done that work of reflecting on past hurts, then you're not going to be hurt in the exact same way again. And I always say that once you've been hurt and you understand that you can get through it and you can get over it, it makes you stronger in a way that if you don't allow bitterness to take over, you're very strong in a relationship because you're resilient. You're able to know that if a person hurts you, that is a result of their poor choices, right? If someone decides to betray you, that is a result of their poor decision making, right? So you have to learn not to internalize these things. And so that will help you to tap into your resilience and know that you have to trust yourself and you have to trust that you have the tools of discernment, right? You're not going to just hopefully go up to anybody and just open up and share every intimate part of yourself with them. You have to have some boundaries and you have to have some discernment and you have um, to be able to judge what's good for you. And then from there, you have to have trust. Most importantly, trust in yourself. So my advice is start small. Know that you have done the work to at least try to heal as much as you can from the past. Test the waters and see how that person responds, to little invitations to connection and intimacy. And the goal is to move forward at a pace that feels comfortable and safe for you, but also to push the edges of your comfort zone a little bit and open up a little bit more over time. Okay? So I want to remind you that my community, my coaching community, the Boundaries to Bliss Society, is where we go into all of these. You get live group coaching where we answer your specific relationship issues. We talk about how to cultivate that self love, that confidence, healthy boundaries, and really tapping into your femininity. And you can see more about it at the link in the show notes. You can also get my book, The Boundaries to Bliss Blueprint, for women who are finally ready to win at love. And you can dig deeper into how to express both self love, but also really connect with someone, how to communicate better, and how to have all around healthier relationships. All right. I am so glad that you joined me on this episode. Don't forget, we need you to subscribe, leave a review. If you're watching this, leave a comment, like engage and tell me what do you think, what has been your experiences. And if you have any questions, you can DM me on my Instagram. You can also leave a question, even in the comments, and I will definitely get to it. I'm so glad that you joined me on this episode. And remember, keep shining, keep elevating yourself, and keep trusting that you can attract the love that you want and desire. Until next time, I'm Dr. Nicole.